This is Caravan Midnights, and if you're new to the YouTube channel, if you're watching this on YouTube, then I am John D. Wells, and I've been doing this program for a while, over 3 years now, thanks to the Caravanners who make this program possible, which is why at the end of virtually every news segment, I ask that if you are not a member, that you consider becoming one and help us keep this commercial-free. Call it like you see it program. Not just me calling it as I see it, but the guests who come on calling it as they see it. Keep this program up and running. Keep the ship afloat. The ship being the Ark Midnight. And remember, Ark Midnight is the terrestrial adjunct to this program, Caravan to Midnight. And it comes on every Saturday night from 9 to midnight Central Time on radio station KLIF. Now, you know, I had no idea when I first went to Coast AM. I thought, here's an opportunity to talk about scientific things and those things of wonder and adventure and amazement and so forth. But I came onto the scene there at a very interesting time. It's when, well, the earth began to experience all this tumult. Now, it's easy to say you look back through history and the earth was always experiencing tumult, particularly where the people are concerned. A buddy of mine, a lifelong friend, Ed, up in the Pacific Northwest, works for a big aircraft manufacturer. You can probably guess who it is. Commented on this one time by pretending to be an extraterrestrial looking through some sort of a telescope and saying, oh, look, over there, they're getting violent. Well, they're always getting violent. But so I try to get that exploration and that wonder and that discovery thing going, keep that component going rather than focusing on some subjects that are rather easy to get into, you know, treachery, betrayal, government corruption, financial collapse, and Armageddon, things like that. So we'll deal with the things that are most pressing at the moment. And I think the single biggest deal that is pressing at the moment is the absence of truth. Now, we're going to speak with Dr. Peter Vincent Pry, and I'll tell you why in just a moment. We're also going to speak with Michael Snyder here in just a few minutes. Paul Craig Roberts, Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, he's really pretty radical in a good way. I like that. Generally, radicals are idiots. Witness Antifa, for example. But this is what he's written at paulcraigroberts.org from the 23rd. Truth has become un-American. Those of us who have exited the Matrix are concerned that there are no checks on Washington's use of nuclear weapons in the interest of U.S. hegemony over the world. Washington and Israel are threats to peace. Washington demands world hegemony. Israel demands hegemony in the Middle East. These are two countries that stand in the way of Washington's world hegemony, and they are Russia and China. Consequently, Washington has plans for preemptive nuclear strikes against both countries. It's difficult to imagine a more serious threat to mankind, and there is no awareness or acknowledgement of this threat among the Congress, the prostitute media, and the general public in the United States, and Washington's European vassal populations. Two countries and a part of a third stand in the way of greater Israel. Israel wants the water resources of southern Lebanon but cannot get them, despite twice sending in the Israeli army because of the Lebanese Hezbollah militia, which is supplied by Syria and Iran. This is why Syria and Iran are on Washington's hit list. Washington serves the military security complex, Wall Street, and the oversized U.S. banks, and Israel. It is unclear if the Russians and Chinese understand that Washington's hostility toward them is not just some sort of misunderstanding that diplomacy can work out. Clearly, Russia has not interfered in the U.S. presidential election, nor have they invaded Ukraine, and does not intend to invade Poland or the Baltics. Russia let go of the Soviet empires, glad to see it gone, as the empire was expensive and of little benefit. The Soviet Eastern European Empire comprised Stalin's buffer against another Western invasion. The Warsaw Pact had no offensive meaning. It was not the beginning, as misrepresented in Washington, of Soviet world domination. I see a lack of clarity about the threat that Russia faces in Russia media reports and articles posted on Russian English language websites. I see a lack of clarity in Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov's continued efforts to work out an accommodation with Washington. How can Lavrov work out an accommodation with Washington when Washington intends to dominate or isolate Russia? Lavrov and Russian media organizations do not always show awareness that it is not Washington's intention to accommodate other national interests. It cannot otherwise be but for these three reasons. The budget for the U.S. military security complex is the largest in the world. It's larger than the gross domestic product of many countries. It includes not only the Pentagon's budget, but also the budgets of 16 U.S. intelligence agencies and the Department of Energy, which is the location of the Oak Ridge nuclear weapons plant and 16 other national labs. When all the elements are added together, the military security complex has annually the power and profit from $1 trillion. That's 1,000 billion. That's some pretty good-sized dough. I added that for emphasis. An empire of this sort just doesn't give up and then go away because some president or some part of the electorate wants peace. The Russian threat is essential to the power and profit of the military security complex, about which President Eisenhower warned Americans 56 years ago. Just imagine how entrenched this power is now. Number two, the neoconservatives who control both U.S. foreign policy and the Western media's explanation of it are mainly Jews of Zionist persuasion. Some are dual Israeli-U.S. citizens. The neoconservatives believe that the collapse of Soviet communism means that history has chosen the United States as the socio-politico-economic system and that the U.S. government has the responsibility to assert the hegemony of America over the earth. Just read the neocon documents. They assert this over and over. This is what it means, that America is the exceptional and indispensable nation. If you are the indispensable nation, every other nation is dispensable. If you are exceptional, everyone else is unexceptional. The claim that the neoconservatives make for the U.S. is similar to the claim that Hitler made for Germany. And number three, as Israel controls U.S. Middle East policy, Israel uses its control to have Washington eliminate obstacles to Israel's expansion. So far, Israel has achieved the overthrow of Saddam Hussein's government and chaos in Iraq, Washington's war on Syria, and Washington's demonization of Iran in the hope that sufficient demonization will justify war. For the Russian foreign minister to believe that it is possible to reach an accommodation with Washington other than a Russian surrender is nonsense. Perhaps this is Lavrov's use of diplomacy to delay the U.S. attack while Russia prepares. Or perhaps Lavrov is just a diplomat who sticks to his last, despite the facts. Much of the Russian media, both in Russian and foreign language broadcasts and websites, thinks that the Western misrepresentation of Russia is just a mistake, and that the facts, once they are established, can rectify the mistake. These Russian journalists don't understand that Washington could not care less about facts. Washington desperately needs an enemy, and Russia is the enemy of choice. Now, the Chinese government seems to think that Wall Street and U.S. corporations are too dependent on the cheap Chinese manufacturing labor, which keeps the U.S. system fueled with profits, to jeopardize these profits by going to war. By underplaying the risk of war, Russia and China fail to mobilize world opposition to Washington's recklessness and thereby enable Washington's move toward war. The prostitutes serving the national security state continue to drive toward conflict. Consider Newsweek's May 26 cover story with Putin on the cover and the caption, "The Plot Against America, Inside Putin's Campaign to Destroy Democracy in the U.S." That's Newsweek, right? It's difficult to imagine such ignorant nonsense from a mainstream news magazine. Democracy in America has been destroyed by special interest groups, by a U.S. Supreme Court decision that gave the reins of power to special interest groups, and by a hoax war on terror that has destroyed the U.S. Constitution. And here we have the prostitute saying that Putin is destroying American democracy. Clearly, there is no extant intelligence anywhere in the Western media. The Western prostitutes are either corrupt beyond belief or ignorant beyond belief. Nothing else can be said for them. Consider Time magazine's cover. It depicts Trump turning the White House into the foundation for the Kremlin and St. Basil's Cathedral, which rise above the White House, symbolizing America's subservience to Russia under President Trump. This extraordinary propaganda seems to be readily accepted by the bulk of the Western populations, peoples who will die as a result of their insouciance. Even writers critical of Washington, such as Paul Street's recent article on Counterpunch and the English-language Russian website Strategic Culture Foundation, cannot bring themselves to state the truth that the U.S. military security complex needs a major enemy and has elected Russia for that role and intends to defend this orchestration to the end of humanity on Earth. Street writes about, quote, how Russia became our adversary again. According to Street, Russia became the enemy of choice because Russia protected part of the world's population and resources from being exploited by global capital. Russia became the #1 enemy of the U.S. also because Putin stopped the American exploitation of Russia economically. Putin is in the way of Washington's exploitation of the world. Much of what Street says is correct, but he's hesitant to state it in a straightforward manner. He has to dilute his message by repeating the obligatory propaganda. Street calls Trump, who originally wanted normal relations with Russia, an orange-haired brute who admires Putin's authoritarian manliness. Trump's problems originated in his goal of normalizing relations with Russia. Hillary is the brute who intended to worsen the relations. Putin is a Democrat, not an authoritarian. The authoritarians are in Washington. Surely Paul Street and Counterpunch know this, but Street has to protect himself from speaking some politically incorrect truths about the U.S. and Russia by throwing in some anti-Putin propaganda and denigrating President Trump. That peace with Russia and China would undermine the justification of the $1 trillion, let's say it this way, $1,000 billion military security budget, and that the military security complex is the American government, is too much truth for most writers to state. Truth is the most rare element in the Western world, and we will not be permitted to have much of it much longer. Increasingly, truth is difficult to find. Soak it up while it's still available. So what do you think? All right then. From WND.com, murdered DNC staffer Seth Rich reportedly sent 44,053 internal DNC emails to WikiLeaks before he was gunned down while walking home from a bar in the wee hours of the night on July 10, 2016. Twitter, whose founder has expressed regret that his organization's advocacy for free speech may have contributed to Donald Trump's election as president. Can you believe this? On Wednesday, suspended for 12 hours, WND.com's account for a headline tweet on Donna the Moron Brazil and her involvement in the scandal developing over the death of DNC staffer Seth Rich. Do not let this thing about Seth Rich go. Don't let it go. Those bastards are so afraid that they're going to be busted because they were so sure that their lying, stealing, and cheating would get Hillary into the White House, and when that failed, they are absolutely incontinent. They can't make it to the toilet fast enough, 10 times a day. Rich died in a gun attack in Washington, D.C. last July, and several individuals believe he was the source of the DNC internal emails that were turned over to WikiLeaks and published on the internet on the eve of the Democratic National Convention. The tweet was, bombshell, Donna Brazil warned off Private Eye on Seth Rich murder. Yeah, Donna Brazile and that idiot Maxine Waters, those are a couple of real geniuses. That's exactly who you want in government, because those people, as the so-called liberal left Marxist moron sell, those people who think that minority students are too stupid to learn proper English, so Ebonics should be encouraged. Do you understand? Do you understand that the Democrats were the party of slavery? We keep hearing about slavery. Great-grandmammy and grandpappy was slaves. Yeah, and you dumbasses keep voting for Democrats. Jim Crow laws, Democrat. When do you ever mention Abraham Lincoln? Huh? He was a Republican. Is that why you don't mention it? He's the one that produced the Emancipation Proclamation, but oh, no Abe Lincoln. And you're so damn stupid that you want your own history erased. Witness Henry County down there in Georgia. They're going to close the whole museum. They can't display a Confederate flag, so why display a Union flag? That's what political correctness will get you. But then back to this idiot, Donna Brazile, if I can make this thing do it. Well, we've determined that you violated the Twitter rules, so we've temporarily limited some of your account features. And that's all it was. Bombshell. Donna Brazile warned off Private Eye on Seth Rich murder. Okay? I'll tell you something else, too. There's nothing in it for me to make stuff up, but somebody is all over our computers. Somebody's all over them. And that's okay, because what that tells me is that somebody really doesn't want this information getting out, which is exactly why, if you really care, if you really want the truth, you need to support organizations like Caravan to Midnight, and then the others that you want to support. With a few measly bucks. There are almost 750 programs in archive now, and we produce new ones every week. And it's $60 a year. That's like somewhere around 8 cents per program. I suspect it's down around 7 point something cents per program. But the important part is that somebody doesn't want you to hear any of this. Why is that? Why would they be so afraid? I mean, if it's all just conspiracy theory and nonsense, why would they worry? It's because it's not conspiracy theory nor nonsense. It's actual conspiracy, and it's perpetrated by those people, and they don't want you to know about it, because you might actually be motivated to do something about it. Because you're the only ones who can. I can't. I'm just one person. I get one vote, and that's it. But there are many of you, and you have many friends. If each of you watching this right now has 10 friends, and you pulled them in, that's what you call force multiplication. And we probably better get our force multiplied pretty soon, or we're not going to have any force. These people know exactly what they're doing. There have been mass roundups before, and there is such a thing as a political prisoner. You better get ahead of the airplane. When you fly in an airplane, you need to be thinking, what are the next 2 things I need to do? Because if you find yourself in a position where the air is bumpy, or the weather's turning bad, or you got some sort of an in-flight emergency, kind of need to get it on the ground because you can't really pull over when you're up there, and you're behind the aircraft, meaning you haven't kept up with what's going on. Now what you're reaching for is, what do I do now? Rather than, what are the next 2 things I need to do? And be ready for that. You have to do it. In the meantime, BBC TV 4 decided to go ahead and just cut this this segment. You know, after the Manchester bombing, their man goes out and decides to interview some people on the street of the Libyan community. And get the response and how they feel about things and so forth. So anyway, there's this woman, she's in a full Islamic veil, and on her garment it says love, but it's made out of, the E is a machine gun, and the O is a grenade, and the V is a knife that's open, like a big pocket knife that's open. I don't remember what the L is, but in any case, she's standing there all covered up. All you can see are her little eyes squinting out from her spooky suit. And so Channel 4 goes over to visit a Muslim community in South Manchester, get their take on the Islamic terror attack that, according to the reports, killed 23 and injured 120 others. I guess they wanted to get away from that. 22 people killed on the 22nd by a 22-year-old, so now it's 23 people are killed. And, of course, the first thing your eyes go to is this woman in total black veil. Only her eyes are visible with love emblazoned on it, a machine gun, grenade, and a knife and this other stuff. Anyway, so she's asked by the host, Krishnan Guru Murthy, about her reactions and feelings in the aftermath of this terrible, tragic attack. And the woman said she didn't need to prove anything. And she also said Islamophobia will probably rise now. Muslims will feel more isolated. What do you think? I mean, obviously, hate with hate. People will retaliate, obviously. But BBC didn't want them to actually broadcast that. I wonder what Katie Hopkins thinks about that. I bet I know. And in the meantime, according to the Wall Street Journal, you need to get ready to unpack for airport security. That's right. Travelers should expect new procedures at TSA checkpoints later this year, with more carry-on items like food and tablets separated into bins. Because the Muslims may get you, or some weaponized Caucasian. Undoubtedly a Caucasian of the Christian persuasion who probably has an AR-15 at home. That's the way mainstream, Ministry of Smoke and Mirrors will present it to you. The big question is, why are we permitting this? Well, we have to be fair. We have to be fair about what? Well, these people are upset. I mean, is this a guilt trip? Are we just allowing some of our own to be sacrificed because we've blown up so many of their innocent people while attempting to establish absolute hegemony in the Middle East? Is that it? Oh, that's right. That's Israel that's going to do that. Ah, boy. How about this? Oh, I know what some of you may say. If I want to hear about the Bible, I'll go to church. Yeah, but you haven't done, have you? So you're going to get a little dose now. Question. What did Elijah do that caused the Lord to focus on him? Elijah urged the people to make up their minds whom they would serve. The nation was almost wholly idolatrous. Sound familiar? The people had forsaken the true God and his commandments. Sound familiar? There was one prophet of God, Elijah, and 450 heathen prophets of Baal. Now that's verse 22 from Kings, 1 Kings. Elijah suggested that both he and the idolaters build altars and place wood and a bull on them. Then he suggested they ask the true God to reveal himself by setting fire to his altar. The heathen god did not answer, but the true God of Elijah sent fire from heaven, meaning the sky, not the Disneyland with streets of gold, all this other stuff. That's metaphor. That's not literal. Sent fire from heaven, burned up Elijah's sacrifice. Elijah's message came at a time of deep spiritual crisis and national apostasy. You know what apostasy is. Turning away from your religion, turning away from God. In the case of this country, like it or not, turning away from Christ. It came with such power from heaven above that it stopped business as usual and drew national attention. Elijah then insisted that people decide whom they would serve, God or Baal. Deeply moved and fully convinced, people chose God. There's nothing that'll get people to make a decision like having a fireball come down from the sky and set fire to an altar after you said, okay, God, with all due respect, please reveal yourself. And then he does. Well, have you ever had God reveal himself to you? I don't mean show up like big white beard and all that in the sky like in the Monty Python cartoons. And that's not what I'm talking about. Have you ever had your creator tap you on the shoulder and go, hey, what are you doing? Yes? No? Well, the Elijah message has a twofold application. It applies to a present truth message to prepare people for Jesus' first advent, meaning the first time he comes, and a present truth message to prepare people for Jesus' second advent. Who did Jesus say preached the Elijah message to prepare people for his first advent? Well, Lord Jesus said, there hath not risen a greater than John the Baptist, and if ye will receive it, this is Elias, or Elijah, which was for to come. So read your Revelation, read it, and know this, there is a special blessing, according to Scripture, for those who will read Revelation. And if you read it, I think you're going to find some really frightening parallels. And if you don't, all you spent was about 2 minutes listening to me tell you about it. Just because you believe does not mean suddenly you turn lily white. It's an ongoing battle to get sucked into the jackpot of stuff that'll kill you. Whether it's crime, drugs, it makes no difference. Anything that you know damn well is wrong, if you take a big enough dose of it, it'll try and kill you, and eventually it will succeed. So, this could be really good for you. I'm just asking you to consider it. I'm not trying to pull out the syringe and inject you with it, although you could inject yourself with worse. And in the meantime, Mr. Trump wants to deport a whole bunch of MS-13 gang members, a whole bunch of them. Guess who's scared to death that he's going to do it? Well, they come out of El Salvador, and the mayor of San Salvador is going, you really have to deport them back here? Well, yeah, you deal with them. Okay? Now, we're going to speak with Dr. Peter Vincent Pry. I like talking to him. And Ministry of Smoke and Mirrors is, if they are picking this up, they're not saying anything about it, but there are these two satellites, KMS 3-2 and KMS 4. They're Earth observation satellites launched by North Korea in April of 2012 and February 2016. Now, Dr. Peter Vincent Pry is Executive Director of the Task Force on National and Homeland Security and is the Chief of Staff of the Congressional EMP Commission. And he warned they are positioning themselves as sort of a nuclear missile age, cyber age version of the battleship diplomacy, in my view, so that they can always have one of them very close to being over the United States or actually being over the United States. Then if a crisis comes up and we decide to attack North Korea, Kim Jong can threaten our president and say, well, don't do that because we're going to burn your whole country down, which is pretty much what he said. He's made threats about turning the United States into ashes, and he's connected the satellite program to this in public statements to deter us from attacking. And Dr. Pry has stated if you want to win a new Korean war, one of the things you would certainly consider doing is taking out the United States homeland itself. And if Kim Jong-un really is a nutbag, when we perceive he is, now that I'm convinced that he actually exists, I thought he was just like a really good holographic cartoon. It's so idiotic. Then we probably ought to pay attention to this. But first, we're going to speak with Michael Snyder, the Economic Collapse blog and End of the American Dream. Look, forewarned is forearmed. And I don't mean forearmed as in your forearm. I mean forearmed. Armed before the event. You know, it's the old Better to have it, in this case the information, and not need it, than to need it and not have had it. You got no chance then. Okay? All right then. All right, Michael, I was just looking over your two websites, the economiccollapseblog.com, which you're most known for, and then End of the American Dream. And gosh, there's where shall we begin? Oh, you want to do terror attacks? You want to do EMPs out of North Korea? You want to do what? Let's see. There's whole lots of blips on the scope. Which are the bright ones on your scope?
Well, to me, one of the main things that I'm concerned about is this whole thing with Trump, where the deep state is really trying to take him down. And you see with the presidency, I warned about this right after Donald Trump got elected, and people would have me on their shows, and I warned people. I said, hey, I've been in D.C. I know what the environment is like, and there's a vast array of laws that apply to the executive branch. Now, and of course, they're very selectively enforced. Obama, he could pretty much do whatever he wanted, and no one was ever going to go after him, even though he was, flouting the Constitution, breaking laws all over the place. No one really cared. But now that Trump is in, his enemies in Congress, both Democrat and Republican, a lot of Republicans hate Trump in Congress, but then also throughout the deep state is what it's called, throughout the layers of bureaucracy and government that are there. They're just waiting for him to trip up. And Trump is not an experienced politician. He doesn't know all these laws. He doesn't have that much of a filter, which on the campaign trail is one thing, but once you're in office, you got to be very, very careful. Because if you break one of these, there's literally thousands of laws that he could potentially break. And if you break one of them, they're going to be waiting there to jump on him because they want to use the law as a weapon to overturn the election, to undo what has been done. And so they want to get rid of him. They want to stop basically this mini revolution which has taken place. But they want to do it legitimately. And they want to do it so it looks legal. And so they're just waiting. And so with this Russia thing, they're saying, oh, did he cover up? Did he collude with the Russians? They're trying to find any angle that they can to try to take him down. Now, did Trump commit obstruction of justice? Alan Dershowitz has come out and said, even if everything that Comey is saying is true, it doesn't rise to the level of obstruction of justice. Other liberal legal experts have come forward and said the same thing, and that's my opinion as well, that even if everything being alleged against Trump is true, it may have been inappropriate, but he hasn't committed any crimes. But you can see the mainstream media pounding on this day after day because, of course, the mainstream media is controlled by the establishment that wants Trump out. Members of Congress are yelling impeachment. Members of his own party are questioning him and saying, yeah, maybe impeachment is a possibility because they want Trump gone. They want this revolution gone. Now, of course, Donald Trump is not perfect. None of us are, but Trump is not perfect. No one ever has claimed he's perfect. But he was someone that was willing to stand up to the establishment and say, no, we're not going to do it your way. And, some of Trump's ideas are great. Some are, maybe not so good. But at least he was willing to shake his fist at the established order and say, no, I think we should do things differently. And so the American people, tens of millions of Americans rallied to that. And it struck a chord. And it gave so many Americans a little bit of a taste of liberty and freedom, and that, we could do something to fight the establishment, to fight this growing tyranny all around us. And so people responded to that, and by some miracle, Trump was actually able to win the election. I consider it the greatest political miracle in American history, in all of our history. But now the elite, the establishment, the deep state wants to undo that. They want to put this fire out before it can really catch fire and we can, completely transform government, because ultimately that's what we need to do. And, I kind of compare it to, in military terms, because my father was in the U.S. Navy. In military terms, when there's an amphibious invasion, it's the troops that get to the beach first that take the most fire. And that's what Trump has really done. He's hit the beach first. So he's taking a tremendous amount of fire. And so he needs the rest of us kind of to storm the beach as well to back him up. But I'm so concerned about this because it's really a political coup. At this point, it's nonviolent, but what they're trying to do is it's the same result. They're trying to destroy Trump, get rid of him. And it's not so much about him and his beliefs. It's about putting out this fire of freedom, of liberty, this uprising from the people. They want to put that out. They want to reestablish control of the elite, of the deep state, their total dominance and control over the government. And so they want to return things to the way they were. But what we need to do, the big reason why we need Trump to succeed is so this beachhead of freedom and liberty can continue, and so the rest of us can jump on board. And so that ultimately what we need to do is completely transform our government, because our government's become this horrendous monster. You know, our founding fathers wanted a very limited federal government, most of the powers to the state, freedom and liberty for the people maximized, where the government's afraid of the people rather than the other way around. But instead, this very limited central government that our founders intended has become this horrible monstrosity, and we need to tame that monster and restore the limited government, the republic that our founders originally intended.
This is really weird. You know, over there on your End of the American Dream site, the Don't Feed the Rhinos, that's a really good, I guess you call it a meme now, good image. You know, this is very disturbing that I mean, it's been generally accepted now that the two parties pretty much behave as one party. And I mean, we've talked about this ad nauseum, you and me and you and other people and me and other people. But the question is, what are these anti-Trumpers, anti-constitutionalists, what is it that they're afraid of? Because the only thing you ever see out of them is their vitriol toward the current president. Or, I mean, when they're not just generally applying it to true conservatives and patriots generally. What do you think is their greatest fear? Are they just so kinkified up there with the pedophilia this and a Clinton Foundation that, and, you know, I don't know, new tires in the garage or the case of liquor by the back door and a couple of $1 million in their bank account? Are they just afraid of being exposed? Is that why they need to take him down? Because that's what I'm thinking. These people are running like they're scared to death. They act more desperate every day. And I'm just wondering what they're so desperate about.
Well, I think exposure is one part of it, where you look at this Seth Rich thing, which, you know, anyone that kind of looks at the facts, they say, oh, it was a botched robbery, but they didn't take anything from him. You know, the robbers, you know, didn't even, you know, take any of his money or his wallet or anything. And then, you know, and it's obvious that this was the guy that was leaking the documents, and that, you know, the Democrats wanted to make an example of him. And so they had him killed. And so now they're working so hard to try to shut this up, to shut down, because they don't want it to be exposed. Or you mentioned, you know, the sex crimes, you know, and it goes on and on. There's so much, because there's so much evil, there's so much so much corruption in our system. So many of our politicians, I mean, they go through their entire lives just in fear of being exposed, of the light being shown on them, because, you know, if the truth came out, so many of our politicians, and not only them, but the whole support system, you know, they're the people that work for them, the people that they're associated with, the people that donate money. So, you know, so many would be going to prison if the light was shown on them and it was revealed what they're actually doing. So that is part of the fear. Another part of the fear is there's a tremendous amount of money in big government and big government, the military industrial complex, where, you know, the banks feed off the government, and you know, we see so many from Goldman Sachs going into government, so many from the government going to, you know, back to the big banks. And, it's one big kind of incestuous system where there's a tremendous amount of money to be made. There's a tremendous amount of money to going back and forth between business and government. There's a tremendous amount of money going to fund campaigns and politicians doing favors for the people who got them elected. So there's a tremendous amount at stake because there's so much invested, so much money being made. So that's part of it too, just the money. And then also, on a real simple level, it's also about control, where the elite truly believe that they know better than all the rest of us. They think that they should be the ones running society, and politics, particularly liberal politics or big government politics, which would include so many Republicans as well. It's a magnet for control freaks. Control freaks are drawn to that type of politics like a moth to a flame, because for control freaks, that's kind of their the ultimate is where you can be in federal government, where you can be telling all of society what to do, not only the country but ultimately the world, because the United States is the biggest superpower in the world and kind of tells the world what to do. So that bleeds over into our foreign policy, where we want to be the police of the world. We want to tell everybody what to do. But it's control freaks that don't want to give up their control. They don't want to give up big government because that empowers them to do that. While people like me and you and others, we want to say, no, we want to dramatically shrink the size of government because we want liberty and freedom, and we want people to be able to live their lives without this tyrannical government oppressing us constantly. And so the instincts are totally different. But ultimately, for people who are in this, who live it, who make their living off of it, this is what their existence is all about. This is the be all and end all of their existence. And so they see Trump or others, voices in the past like Ron Paul, as a major threat who want to dismantle basically what they're living for, their reason for existence.
All right. Well, now how about the Democrats showing their backsides the way they've been doing? All the rage now, and it popped up. I think it's kind of quieted down now, but they're trying to make it sound now, in furtherance of saving their sorry backsides, they're trying to make it look as though they provided the leaks to take the heat off of Hillary, which of course makes no sense. But now they're trying to own the leaks themselves. I guess this is also a way to deflect the attention they're getting over Seth Rich's murder.
Yeah, it's in DC. It's all about spin. It's all about, well, what can we sell? What story can we sell? Can we? And sometimes they'll, deflect attention from a bigger scandal to a smaller scandal. They'll say, look at this smaller scandal, just so we won't look at the bigger scandal. So this is all that is. It's trying to keep people out of prison. It's trying to cover up the real truth from coming out. But ultimately, politics is a very dirty game in America. And if you look at the Clintons, I mean, there's a trail of dead bodies. All you got to do is Google Clinton body count. It goes all the way back to the 1980s, back to Arkansas, of all these people that were associated with them, close to them, could potentially damage their political careers, that ended up dead, dying very suspicious, untimely deaths. And so, Seth Rich is certainly not alone. He's got a lot of company in that regard, but it's a whole lot of corruption. And, it's been said, that all that is necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. And so if we just let them get away with it and we let this go, well, it's going to get worse and worse and worse, and the corruption and the evil and the tyranny of government. And then, eventually we don't have any shred of our republic left. Our way of life, our system of government looks nothing like our founders intended. And then future generations, our children, I've got a daughter, a 2-year-old daughter. She grows up in a society that is a dystopian nightmare because my generation didn't stand up. So all throughout American history, people have had to stand up and fight for liberty and freedom, whether it's literally giving their lives, like in the Revolutionary War, World War II, whatever, or have had to stand up politically or other ways. But in every generation, Americans have to stand up and say, no, we're going to fight for the values and the principles this country is founded upon. We're going to fight for liberty and freedom. We're going to oppose and resist tyranny. And we've got to do it again, or we're going to lose everything.
Michael, looking at the economiccollapseblog.com, I saw that on another site that Bitcoin's now gone through 2,500, which is amazing, right? I mean, this is a radical shift in subject matter here, but you got an article here, Financial Weapons of Mass Destruction. The top 25 U.S. banks have, is this for real? $222 trillion of exposure to derivatives? 222 trillion?
Yeah, that's the total potential exposure to these derivatives contracts that these banks have. So, we didn't learn our lesson from the last time around, where the big banks got into so much trouble and we were told the taxpayers got to bail them out and, we're going to fix things so this doesn't happen again. The banks were really reckless this time, but now, okay, if you bail them out, and, we're gonna patch together the system, and then we're gonna make sure the banks, don't really do this anymore, and we're gonna, get the system back on more solid ground. But of course, that didn't happen. Instead, they pumped up this giant financial bubble again, just like before. And every bubble eventually burst. Whether it happens next week, next month, next year, whenever, every huge financial bubble never lasts forever. And these banks, in a desperate attempt to push their profits higher and higher and higher, they're getting into these risky financial contracts known as derivatives. Now, if people listening, they're like, well, what's a derivative? Well, derivatives are different from, like, for example, if you buy a stock, you're buying an ownership interest in a company. So it's actually something real. If you're buying a bond, you're buying the debt of a company. Well, with derivatives, you're not actually getting anything real. And they can be extremely complicated and whatever, but I like to break it down very simply. Basically, derivatives are basically side bets or wagers that something will or will not happen in the future, whether interest rates will go up or go down, or whether, currency rates will, the dollar will get stronger or not get stronger. Basically you're putting bets that something will or will not happen. Then there's a winner and then there's a loser. And these big banks have found that these kind of getting involved with these wagers, buying and selling and trading in them, can be very, very profitable. And they've got all kinds of computer algorithms to figure these out and figure out where the profits are. And so they dive headlong into these things. But eventually, just like the last financial crisis, eventually something comes along, creates a huge crisis, things start to move and shift very, very rapidly, and then a lot of these bets start to go bad, and then they're like, oh, we're going broke, we need another bailout. So, like you mentioned in my, I wrote this article that if you combine the top 25 banks in the country, they have combined exposure to derivatives of $222 trillion, which is absolutely insane. And the biggest of the too big to fail banks are the biggest violators of all. For example, Citigroup. And the names I'm about to mention, almost all of us, whether we have a mortgage through one of these banks, an auto loan, a credit card, almost all of us deal with these banks on some level. And so I'm just going to mention a couple of them here. But and you're probably, oh yeah, I've got an account with such and such. But for example, Citigroup, they've got total assets for the bank of a little bit less than $1.8 trillion, but they've got exposure to derivatives of more than $47 trillion. So, their exposure to derivatives absolutely swamps their total assets. So it's like they're on this high wire act where they could fall off at any time. But it's not just Citigroup. JP Morgan Chase, assets of about $2.5 trillion. exposure to derivatives, once again, about 47 trillion. Or Goldman Sachs, they've actually got total assets of less than $1 trillion, but total exposure to derivatives more than $41 trillion. Or Bank of America, total assets $2.1 trillion, exposure to derivatives more than $33 trillion. So this is so alarming because most Americans don't understand these things, don't understand these complicated financial instruments, and they think everything's fine. The stock market is absolutely soaring. That must mean the economy is doing well. Well, throughout this program, we can talk about a whole lot of numbers that say it's not doing well. In fact, GDP number for the first quarter of this year was just 0.7% on an annual basis. Horrible. And, auto loan defaults are surging, dramatically, and we can go on and on and on. I've got lots of numbers to show the real economy is doing horrible, but it's kind of like 2007, before the last crisis. Stock market was soaring. Everybody thought it was great. The banks were being super risky. No one was listening to the warnings. And then it all came crashing down. Then we were told all of a sudden the world's coming to an end. We've got to bail out the banks. The stage is set for an even bigger crisis because the debt loads are even bigger. The risk taking is even larger. The banks are even more vulnerable. Our financial system's even more vulnerable than before. So we've got such short memories. We just made all the same mistakes. We just made them even bigger. And so we've got a potentially even bigger crisis, where, right ahead of us. And yet people out there are saying, well, the stock market's at an all-time record high. That must mean everything's going to be wonderful.
Yeah. If you don't mind, I just kind of getting just momentarily a little crazy with it. You look at you got about 500 people up there in Congress, and you got a certain number of, a few hundred people that are really at the, few hundred people, not really even a few thousand, just maybe a couple of hundred people at the very top of the banking industry. And I'll tell you, as I look at these articles, scan over the various news sources, of which I got to tell you, and I mean no platitudes here, you've got some really good sites and some really, really good information on here. It's really outstanding. I'm just thinking that if suddenly the People's Army of America managed to organize and go to Washington, D.C. to physically drain the swamp, Michael, it looks to me like things are so screwed up and the system is so complex, I'm not sure anybody would even know what to do if we were to grab these nefarious individuals by the scruffs of their necks and just physically throw them out. Just put them in just say, okay, we're gonna put them down at Guantanamo, and when we get around to it, we'll have all the appropriate hearings and trials and so forth. I mean, has this thing just gotten, in your opinion, so big that there's no fixing it other than to roll the clock back to about, I don't know, maybe I was going to say 1930. I thought no, and then I thought 1830. I thought, well, maybe not. I mean, there's no going back to anything. I think a lot of us would like to go back to some period that we seem to remember as being better. But looking back into history, I can't pick any point in history where things were calm. It was either the threat of nuclear annihilation, or, I mean, on your site, you have indicated that not only is the system killing small business, as stated here, the number of self-employed Americans is lower than it was in 1990. And then the next one is, over the last 10 years, the U.S. economy has grown at exactly the same rate as it did during the 1930s, which makes you wonder, was this a predictive system that registers these cycles which are going to happen, and if we are in one of those cycles now? In other words, while I like to hold out some hope, I can't hold out any hope. Not today, anyway. Maybe later on this afternoon, or maybe tomorrow night, something, so to speak. But this damn thing has become monstrous. Can you conceive, even if it came down to rubbing the genie out of the lamp and just going, Genie, I don't care how you do it, I just want you to do it. Is there any way to establish national sovereignty, disconnect from these overseas conflicts, and stop this incessant loaning of money to produce primarily weapons because they're expensive. And I even did a program one time for what became it was for Texas Instruments at the time, and it was about how to how the weapons. I don't even know what you call them. What do you call the guys that outfit the aircraft with all the weapons that they need? How you could do this according to how much money you were loading under the wings, because some of these pilots were using really expensive missiles on trucks and stuff. They were going, no, stop that. You got a specific mission, and we're going to show you a suite of weapons, and you select these weapons based on cost of your particular sortie. And I'm thinking to myself, this is, I mean, I could see where this would be valuable, but it also seems really wrong. And so I'm kind of wandering around here, but it's like money, 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 money. And now we're talking about $222 trillion in derivatives exposure. You've just said they're doing the same thing they did before. Apparently they don't learn from risky lending. Most of us learn that from our children. So is there any way out of this mess? Is there any kind of a plan? Maybe one that you carry in your mind privately that if we could just do this, would be on the path to some sort of stability. I've never even conceived of such instability and potential disaster as a result of it. Now stop now and turn it over to you.
Yeah, unfortunately, I believe that things are so advanced in terms of these problems, these bubbles, that I don't know that we're going to have time to turn it around before we have just a tremendous crisis, basically reaching one of the worst crisis points in our history, the history of our country,
the history of the world.
I think that is probably going to be necessary. And let me try to explain. In that it's been said that when things are going well, people tend to party, but when things go bad, people tend to ponder. And so right now the stock market's at an all-time high. People are still feeling, pretty good. Trump just got elected, at least, people who are Republican or conservative. And so, even though things aren't going that great overall for the economy and otherwise, it's not a disastrous situation. Most people are living their normal lives as they normally would. And so, most people aren't of the mindset that the system needs to be fundamentally transformed because, well, life, is pretty normal right now. But, back in 2008, 2009, people were much more of that mindset that something dramatic needed to be done because they were in the midst of a horrible, crisis. Millions of people were losing their jobs and things weren't going well. So I believe that it will probably take a major crisis, economic, financially, political, and really we could have so much happen at simultaneously moving forward, I believe. And when we reach that crisis point, then all of a sudden people may be more willing to listen to the fixes that are necessary, when the financial system falls apart. I mean, right now people are saying, oh, I'm making money in the stock market, everything's fine. But when the stock market crashes again, even worse than last time, when the financial system falls apart, when we're told the banks need bailouts again, people are going to say, what in the world? Why are we going through this again? Maybe then they'll listen. And you ask, well, when can we turn the clock back to? I would propose that one year that I might throw out there would be 1913. That was the year that the Federal Reserve was created. And really, the Federal Reserve is at the very heart of our debt-based financial system, which has created all of these bubbles, all of these boom and busts. And, 2008, 2009, we had a bust. Now we're in, kind of the bubble, although as we can talk about in a minute, average economic growth over the last 10 years has just been 1.3%. So that's not exactly much of an economic bubble, but there's been a stock market bubble, which has been pumped up by the Federal Reserve, quantitative easing, pushing interest rates as low as possible. But really, since the Federal Reserve was created in 1913, there have been 18 recessions or depressions. And so we've had this cycle over and over again, boom and bust, every few years. And now I believe another one is rapidly approaching. But it's the Federal Reserve, which is, what we ultimately need to do, as Ron Paul so strongly advocated. So when he was in Congress, we need to get rid of the Federal Reserve System. We need to shut it down, because ultimately it's the Federal Reserve that is destroying the value of the U.S. dollar, which has been lost more than 98% of its value since 1913. It's the Federal Reserve System. The system itself was designed to create government debt. It was designed to create an endless debt spiral of debt, government debt going bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, which could never be paid off, but would just constantly enrich the elite, the establishment, make them richer and richer and richer and richer, transferring money from us to the government through the income tax, which also came in 1913, then transferring that money to the elite through the government debt. And so making them wealthier, transferring money from the taxpayers. But the greatest period of economic growth in U.S. history, a lot of people don't understand this, was the period before 1913, when there was no central bank, no income tax. The U.S. economy had its best period ever in those decades leading up to 1913. And we could do it again, but it basically mean completely transforming, turning over all the tables and rebuilding our system from scratch with no central bank. And of course, the establishment would not like that at all, because at this point, more than 99% of the population of the world lives in a country with a central bank. So even though you can't get the rest of the world to agree on anything else, somehow virtually the entire world has agreed that central banking is the way to go, this debt-based financial system that gets governments into debt all around the world and enslaves entire populations. That's the way to go. More than 99% of the world. Some coincidence, hey? But we need to wake up humanity up to the fact that we don't have to do it this way. We don't have to have debt-based currency. We don't have to have money coming into existence through debt. We don't have to have governments going into debt, enslaving people. Now we've got $152 trillion of debt around the world. It's made the elite, the bankers, ultra wealthy, enslaving the rest of the world. We don't have to do it this way. But in order to change things, we've got to have people that step forward, educate the public, and that are willing to, make these changes.
Do you think we can do it, is the question.
Well, can we do it? There's no guarantees. In the Revolutionary War, the bold men and women that picked up arms that fought against the British, people say, well, it's crazy. You can't fight the British Empire. But they said, hey, we're going to fight for liberty and freedom. We're going to do it. Give us liberty or give us death. And they tried, and they did it. They won our freedom. So where would we be today if they had not taken up arms, if they had not rebelled against the tyrannical British Empire? So there's never any guarantees when you're fighting for liberty and freedom, but we should at least try, because if not, well, we're in $20 trillion in debt now. In a few years, what are we going to be, $30 trillion in debt? I mean, because the Federal Reserve System, people think, well, if we just raise taxes high enough, maybe we could, pay off our debt. No, if we could just grow the economy enough, we could grow our way out of this mess. But the truth is, at this point, it's mathematically impossible to ever pay off our debt. In fact, it's just going to keep going higher and higher and higher, because when money comes into existence, a lot of people, if you ask them, where does money come from? Hardly anyone out there knows, unless they're educated in these things. Well, how money comes into existence, the government just doesn't go and run a printing press and make new money. No, the government goes to the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve creates new money, then gives it to the government in exchange for U.S. Treasury bonds, which the Federal Reserve then auctions off. In essence, what happens is the government borrows money that the Federal Reserve creates, a private central banking cartel, privately owned. Federal Reserve is about as federal as Federal Express. But we don't. The big secret is that no one's supposed to know, John, is that governments don't actually have to borrow any money. Theoretically, instead of borrowing money that the Federal Reserve creates. The government could just create its own money. You know, there's nothing that says the government has to borrow money that these central banks create. And so we could go to an entirely different system, a non-debt-based currency, because if you pull out a dollar today and you look at it, right at the top, what does it say? Federal Reserve note. Now, a note is an instrument of debt, but it's basically an instrument of our enslavement. And we could change it very rapidly. For example, you go back to 1963. President John F. Kennedy issued United States notes. It was debt-free dollars. I mean, they look very similar to Federal Reserve notes. They just didn't say Federal Reserve note, but they were created directly by the federal government. Debt-free currency. And of course, he was assassinated shortly thereafter that. So, the elite obviously, are not too excited about that idea. But we need, not only here in the United States, but nations all over the globe to understand governments don't actually have to borrow money theoretically. We can have a different system where the governments can, and ultimately the U.S. Constitution gives the right for the creation of money, all those things. In fact, it's Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution. Congress is expressly given the authority to, quote, coin money, regulate the value thereof, and of foreign coin, and fix the standard of weights and measures. So the power over currency was given to Congress. So why is this privately owned central banking cartel creating our money? Why do we have to borrow money they create? Why can't the government be in charge of the money? But we're not supposed to talk about that. We're not supposed to know about that. We're not supposed to know that we can get free of this debt-based system that's designed to enslave us, that's designed to transfer money from our pockets through, and we don't have to have an income tax. We don't have to have an IRS. Most people think, well, death and taxes are inevitable. Well, death might be inevitable for people, but taxes don't have to be inevitable. We don't have to have an income tax. We didn't have one before 1913. It was the greatest time for the U.S. economy in history. So we need to think differently. We need to get out of this paradigm of central banking, of income taxes, of big government. We could do things completely differently, but just the willingness has to be there to do so, and we have to educate people that this is possible.
I love it. This is a little bit out of left field, but it'll be my last question for you, Michael. And that is, what do you make of cryptocurrencies? I'm thinking that whether we like it or not, that may actually be the wave of the future. Maybe we're already riding the wave. We don't even know it, because as you say, we've got to have something to compare our money to. If you just got a stack of bills there, it's like, well, what can I get with this? Well, I can trade this for it's a big stack, so I can trade it for a car or maybe a little piece of land, something to get started. So, there's got to be a reference point for the value of any currency. It doesn't matter if it's, purple toothpicks. But what about this Bitcoin thing? And what does it tell you that it's gone over $2,500? Is it just a fad surge, or does this suggest that there's a deeper problem in the other fiat currencies? Because I'm thinking Bitcoin is no different than any other fiat currency, but if I'm wrong, I want to know I'm wrong and get back on the right track here.
Yeah, well, ultimately, I think it is just another fiat currency, but, people are hungry for freedom from the current system that we have, and so they say, oh, Bitcoin, and it's an alternative. We can do this for ourselves, and we don't have, it's not controlled by any government. So people like that, and I understand that it's feeds into that deep human desire for liberty and freedom, and wanting to be, wanting to control their own destiny apart from these tyrannical big governments, which they keep getting bigger and bigger, all over the world. So I understand that. But of course, Bitcoin, does it have any intrinsic value? No. And why people are excited about it is because it's going up in value relative to the US dollar and other currencies around the world, but then that they can still convert those Bitcoins to dollars and buy things that they need. My concern about these cryptocurrencies is that when things completely crash and fall apart, that these cryptocurrencies are going to crash as well, and that when things get really bad, people aren't going to want Bitcoin. They're not going to want these things. And so then all of a sudden there's not going to be a market for them. And I think there could be crash as well. I think, if you got into Bitcoin earlier and you can get out right now, well, you made a lot of money, great for you. But if you wait too long, eventually, I believe, the Bitcoin someday down the road is going to be worthless, unfortunately. So I'm much more of an advocate of gold and silver myself, and so I don't have Bitcoin. It's not something that I am involved in, but people have made good money by being in at the right time and getting out at the right time. And the same thing with the stock market. You make money in the stock market by getting in at the right time, but also by getting out at the right time, getting out before it crashes. So those who have timed things appropriately made a lot of money, and great for them. But ultimately, for the long term, silver and gold throughout all of human history have held their value. I don't think that's going to be the case with Bitcoin, unfortunately.
All right. Now, you got The Beginning of the End is one of your books. Get Prepared Now is another one. The Rapture Verdict is another one. And you've got a new one coming out here in a couple of months. Can you give us a little teaser, something?
Yeah, I do. I'm not ready to release the title quite yet, but I'm going to talk about basically, the kind of things that are at the root of humanity's problems, and how we can fix things not only politically, but on a personal level, on an interpersonal level, on a community level, on the way we need to view the world, and the way we need to view each other needs to change, where we, instead of being divided, instead of looking at someone as the enemy, hey, we need to look at, we're all in this together. We need to learn to love one another. We need to learn to work with one another. And so it's kind of a real philosophical book, but also, for reasons perhaps we can discuss, I'm going to touch on some political things, potential solutions, because sometimes, I run a website called the Economic Collapse Blog, and then people say, oh, Michael, you're gloom and doom. You talk about all of our problems. What about some solutions? Well, in this book, I'm really going to focus a lot on solutions, but, I have been convicted that perhaps now it's my turn, that I need to step forward and start offering some solutions, that we need to put ourselves out there, because what happens is a lot of us sit back and we wait for someone else to do something. And particularly in the political realm, we say, okay, we're going to wait for someone good to come along and run for office or whatever, and then we're going to support them. And once in a while, someone wonderful like Ron Paul comes along, and we all get behind him, and that's great. But he's just one voice. And then, of course, he's retired now. He's no longer in the House. So we need a new generation of people like Ron Paul willing to step forward and saying, hey, I'm going to carry the torch of freedom and liberty. I'm going to try to make a difference, whether it's in Congress like Ron Paul did, or there's a desperate need in state houses all over the country, local government, or whether it's on the, radio, television, media like you're doing, whatever our field is, or whether it's on the local school board, or whether it's through doing websites like I do, or doing street protests, writing a book, doing YouTube videos, and the list goes on and on and on and on. But we all have talents. We all have a field where we can try to make a difference. And when you try to make a difference, sometimes you succeed and sometimes you fail. There's no guarantees. But if we all try, if we all work together, if we rise up as a movement, well, we're going to make a tremendous impact, even if some of us fail. So I'm encouraging everyone to think about what they can do to move the ball forward. Because if we all sit back and just say, oh, things are horrible and we're going to wait for someone else to do something, well, like I said earlier, all that is necessary for evil to triumph is for good men to do nothing. But if we will all say, okay, what can I do to advance the cause of freedom and liberty? Maybe we can turn this thing around. There's no guarantees, but we're certainly not going to succeed if we don't try.
Well, it makes perfect sense. It really does. Thanks for the time. I really appreciate it. And we'll be checking in with you in the next, few days, few weeks, and something pops up on the scope. It's like, call Michael. Okay?
Sounds great.
All right. God bless. Stay safe out there. Michael Snyder. All right, let's see. Well, okay, in closing our little news segment here, which I thought, instead of just headlines and stuff like that, because pretty much, at least today, it's almost same old, same old. People are upset about leaks. Some MS-13 guys are about to get ejected from this country and sent back to El Salvador. The mayor of San Salvador has gone, oh man, really? In the meantime, the police and the military are accused of extrajudicial, well, killings of these gang members, which some would argue that's about the only thing you can do. And, you know, a sex slave ring is broken up. But in the end, no matter how many of these rings are broken up, until the country decides that it's wrong, they're not going to stop. I mean, they're already risking these ring leaders are risking, you know, jail, death, to even have that illicit business anyway. So where there's a demand, there's going to be somebody who's willing to provide the commodity, whatever it might be. So maybe that's the key. Maybe in the end, it really is just probably, you know, it's really kind of unnerving to think about this, but after World War II, the United States emerged as a world power. And it wasn't a world power, really, before World War II. And all that industrialization that occurred, gearing up for the war effort and all this. So things were really booming after World War II. In the 50s, there was the nuclear threat, of course, the Cold War and all of that, and Korea. Okay. But prosperity was on the roll. And then in the 60s, we get Vietnam. But prosperity was pretty much on a roll. 70s, that's when the whole Middle East thing really started kicking off with, you know, the Shah and Carter and hostages, and then the Russians rolled into Afghanistan, and then the 80s, people were kind of content that no matter what they had to say about Ronald Reagan, that the country is in pretty good hands with him as the head of an administration that was pretty good. But then came Iran-Contra. Really, did you really trade weapons for the release of hostages? And the Contra part, did you really trade weapons for cocaine that we brought back here and then sold? Yeah. I think we are suffering from a severe shortage of moral character. Because even that phrase suggests to people, oh, no fun, it'll be boring. Well, minor vices are one thing. But when everybody is so free in their expression, that their freedom of expression turns into criminal activity, and then you get enough people pulled into it, before long it seems to me like you're going to wind up with a criminal nation. This has happened before. It's been written of in Scripture. Solomon was correct. There's nothing new under the sun. There is not a thing other than maybe some tech device that's the result, a new tech device that's the result of doing what? Putting two or three things together and coming up with a new idea. Nothing new under the sun, the same problems, and we just won't do what needs to be done in order to straighten out our society. Because as unpalatable as this may be, as unpleasant, as nauseating, even the people that we don't like from the standpoint of their proclivities, their political orientation, or any other orientation, we may not like them. But like them or not, basically, in the most basic terms, we are brothers and sisters, one big family. But a lot of the family members out there in the wider society are misbehaving on a spectacular level, and frankly, it's dragging the whole country down. If you agree, let me know. If you disagree, let me know. Caravanners, you have made this program possible. I thank you very much for it. Those who are watching this program on YouTube are invited to join us. I can tell you this, there are spheres of influence in the country, primarily in the government strata. They don't want this program. They don't want the guests who come on to Caravan to Midnight, they don't want them to have a voice. In fact, they wish they would just go away. Just stop talking, stop writing, stop blogging, stop creating websites, and stop coming on with this Wells guy on his program. But they don't stop. And they come back, and they come back, and they bring a lot to the party. The thing is, it's what people who are watching this program or listening to it, experiencing this program, it's what they do with the information that gives the program any real value. You know, there's entertainment and there's amusement. Like Joe Pesci said, what, like I amuse you like a clown? But entertainment, that's something else. Entertaining means to hold within. Don't entertain any thoughts like that. We want to be entertaining. We want the content to be worth your time, which is your most valuable commodity. And we have a tidal wave of reports about regarding people's opinions of the program that are overwhelmingly positive. And so, if you're watching on YouTube, make a tiny investment and join us. Enable us to continue to do this program because, as you have seen, we are commercial free and we don't cut the guests off every few minutes so that you can listen to even a larger segment of commercial content. That was the idea, but without sponsors, we offer memberships, and that's how we do it. So join us. We are a family, and not a dysfunctional family at all. We are a fully functional family, and we help each other. And we help each other increase prosperity, enlightenment, and every once in a while, some actual wisdom. So come on, what are you waiting for? There's a link right down there. And now we will have a beautiful musical interlude and bring on our